everyone. My name is Kara Moncrief. I'm the clinical director for Viora, and I'm super happy to have you guys on today. We are continuing our Skin 102 series. So if you guys haven't joined the ones previously, initially I did a Skin 101. So just I want to say simplistic, but it wasn't, because I broke down all the cells and functions of all the layers of the skin. So I kind of want to say it's a prerequisite. If you are new to the industry, new to skin in general, I highly recommend that after today that you watch the Skin 101 and then watch this one probably again, just because you'll have a better understanding of everything I'll be discussing today. So just want to make sure to help you guys as much as possible, and I think that's probably the best way. So the Skin 102 series is going to be deeper dives into certain conditions, certain functions of the body, certain functions of the skin. So what was it, 2-3 weeks ago, I did the first Skin 102, and that was on the lymphatic and circulatory system and how Viora works with both of those. And it does a lot. So, so I covered that first. Now today we are going to be covering a deeper dive into melasma and PIH, because those are the two hardest pigmentations to treat. They're very tricky, and a lot of doctors will say it's the vein of their existence because it's not a simple process, and it's a longer process for both of them. So we'll do a deeper dive into that. And then next week, next Thursday, we are going to be doing another Skin 102 just to continue on with the series, and it's going to be a deeper dive into collagen synthesis. And then that will roll over into scarring, so scar tissue and what's going on inside scar tissue, deeper than what we can see, and how the Viora devices and other things that you guys have in your office, as you compare things together to get optimal results, how those work so well with really transforming somebody's skin that has really bad acne scars or a big surgical scar, anything like that. And it's all due to collagen synthesis, thank goodness. Okay, so that's just a little rundown of the Skin 102 series. I'm going to pull up the PowerPoint now, so give me just a second. Oh, and by the way, I wanted to let you guys know, if you ever have any questions throughout this webinar, you can either unmute yourself. I'll have times that I'll stop and ask if there's any questions. You can unmute yourselves and ask. If you're not comfortable with that, that's okay. You can just write into the chat. I'll read the questions out loud and give an answer. And you can write in anytime, any question that you have when it pops into your head, just write it in the chat so you don't have to wait. All right, so now let me share my screen. Okay, so here we go. I'm just gonna double check, everybody's muted. All right, good. We are all set to go. All right, so Skin 102, the most challenging types of hyperpigmentation, a deeper dive into melasma and PIH, because I covered not so much PIH, but covered melasma and that's another good one to watch too, is the VFR webinar and then the IPL webinar, because we discuss melasma on those as well, especially the IPL. So if you're new to all of this, that's a good one to watch because we do discuss it a little bit there too. Okay, so melasma, that's what we'll start with. So some common causes and aggravating factors to melasma. Genetics is a huge one, and I want you to think of genetics in two different ways. Family history, because that is a big one, but additionally, the patient's phototype or what skin type are they? And we're going to go into this much deeper because that really is such a big topic and big subject with melasma. But genetics, if they have family history, and what their skin type is. 1/3 of patients have a genetic predisposition to melasma. So it can be, if it runs in your family history, a huge percentage that you will acquire melasma as well, unfortunately, especially if it's like your mom or even your dad, because males can have melasma too, your siblings, then there can be a chance that you will develop melasma. Hormones, it's a huge one. That's why they call melasma the mask of pregnancy, because it's so hormonal, and hormones trigger pigmentation in the skin. And we're going to go into a much deeper dive with hormones, including pregnancy and taking birth control pills. We have some statistics and, why is this happening? Certain prescription medications and antibiotics can bring it out. Energy-based treatments. So you also have to be careful when you're using your Viora device or other lasers that you may have in your office, because laser, microneedling, IPL, strong chemical peels can actually backfire on you. If someone comes in with acne scarring and you're trying to treat, the ice pick scars on their skin, and you're using really high-powered lasers and lots of energy, and going into microneedling and doing deep chemical peels, a month or two later, it can come out as melasma. So you have to be careful with that as well. Sun exposure is a huge, huge factor in stimulation of melasma, and we'll go into that deeper too. So actually these next two slides, they're from the Skin 101 presentation. So I wanted to add them in here just as a refresher, because everything has to do with the melanocytes and the keratinocytes and the melanin that's being produced deep in the epidermal layer. So I just wanted to add this here as a review. So there's approximately 1 melanocyte per every 5 to 10 keratinocytes. It's actually more every 10. So here's a good photo of that these are keratinocytes at the bottom here. And this is what is creating, all the skin layers that we have in the epidermis all the way up to the stratum corneum. And about every 10 cells, you'll find a melanocyte. And the melanocyte, they have almost like, looks almost like an octopus. So you can see that in the photo here. And that's due to it's kind of coming in and around the keratinocytes, because it's actually, I might be jumping a little bit here. I think I may be, it's the next one. They're called melanosomes. So that is the pigment granules that provide tissue with color and photoprotection, are the cellular cytosynthesis, storage, and transport of melanin pigments. So that's what the melanocytes are doing. They are transporting pigment to the keratinocytes, and the keratinocytes, remember, are constantly dividing and we're creating new skin cells constantly. And all of that is being pushed to the surface of the skin. And our stratum corneum, our dead skin layers, there's just layer on top of layer on top of layer that eventually shed. But for example, when you go out in the sun and you get a suntan, is the suntan permanent? Unfortunately not. We wish it was. And that's due to, sure, you went in the sun and your body was trying to protect you from the sun exposure, because that's what the melanocytes are there to do. They're there to produce pigment that then go into the keratinocytes that then give a protective barrier against the sun and the UV rays that are very damaging to the deeper collagen layers and elastin layers, really the big function of our skin. So it's trying to protect all of that. And you'll stimulate the melanocytes and it will produce more pigment, but because the skin cells are constantly reproducing and then constantly shedding and sloughing off, so will your suntan. Okay, so melanosomes that are found in melanocytes can be transported in nearby keratinocytes to induce pigmentation. I'm repeating myself. Absorb and reflect UV radiation. Okay, so now here's another photo. And I'll just kind of break down these full bullet points and then or 3 bullet points, and then we'll move forward. Light skin melanosomes are found predominantly in the basal layer. So the basal layer is the very bottom of the epidermis. That's where these melanocytes are found, and that's where all of it, really everything that's happening with pigment is happening down deeper. That's where we're getting the transport of the melanosomes. Dark skin melanosomes are found in the basal layer and into the epidermis, including the stratum corneum. If you see somebody of Hispanic skin type or African skin type, we can see the pigment in their skin, right? We can just look at them and say they have darker skin than myself. I'm just talking about me. You guys may have dark skin. And that's due to their pigmentation isn't just in the basal layer like mine is. Theirs is all the way through the epidermis, all the way into the stratum corneum. That's why if there was an African girl who was the same age as me, 39, and we fast forward 20 years, and now we are 59 years old, who's most likely going to look a lot younger? The African skin type, because she has natural sunscreen. So her collagen and elastin layers are just naturally being protected. And it's due to all of that melanin throughout her whole epidermis. Okay, it requires about 10 days after initial sun exposure for melanin synthesis to peak, which is why pale-skinned individuals tend to suffer sunburns of the epidermis initially. Dark-skinned individuals can also get sunburns, but are more protected than our pale-skinned individuals. So just spoke about that a little bit. And that's really important to understand, because when we go into melasma and the different skin types and why certain skin types suffer more, it's a lot of it has to do with this. Melanosomes are temporary structures, melanin-filled keratinocytes in the stratum corneum sloughing off, making tanning impermanent. So I skipped ahead. All right, any questions so far on just the review, just in case you were not on the Skin 101? Not yet, okay. Well, good, everyone was maybe on the Skin 101. Or you guys just know it already. Okay, so melasma and different skin types. So skin type has a major role in melasma. Skin types 4 through 6 suffer more with melasma than skin types 1 through 3. So whenever I would go over to Asia for trainings, everywhere, China, Myanmar, India, I'm trying to think of, I've been Japan, everywhere in Asia, it's such a huge, huge, huge thing, and a huge concern for so many people. So many people are suffering with melasma, and it's due to them falling into the skin type 4 category. Okay, so I'll explain this. Well, I just lost my train of thought. I was gonna say something before I explained it and I forgot. My apologies. Okay, so skin type, oh, that's what I was gonna say. Now I remember. I was like, oh, it's gonna be important. So remember when we went through, actually I've gone through this in quite a few webinars, and that's skin typing. So the Fitzpatrick quiz, and I always say, never guess somebody's Fitzpatrick. It's so important, because we can burn someone with a laser if we just say, oh, hey, she looks like a skin type 2, but you really didn't know that her mom is Egyptian and her dad's from Greece, and she has much darker skin, but it's the middle of winter and she just doesn't, show that she has darker skin. So, I always preach that. Make sure to have a Fitzpatrick quiz and fill that out, and making sure that they're the proper skin type. Also, what I always say is, if somebody is of Asian ancestry, even if they come in and they look like a China doll and they're so fair, never say, oh my gosh, they're so fair, they're a skin type 1. It just doesn't exist. I always say, always, always, always set your system to a skin type 4 when you're dealing with Asian skin types. Also when you're dealing with Hispanic skin types. But Asian skin types can be a little tricky because they can look fairer than they really are. So just be very careful with that, and always, even if they might be a skin type 3, sometimes, but just always treat them as a skin type 4 for safety. Now, why do skin type 4 through 6 suffer more from melasma than skin types 1 through 3? I'm going to take a skin type 1 and 2 as an example. I'm a skin type 2. Our melanocytes are not very active at all. And that's why I unfortunately stay fair. I would love to be dark. I'm not. I stay fair. And if I went to, let's say, Cabo for the weekend and I wore no sunscreen, I am going to be burnt to a crisp. I'm not going to just naturally tan. And it's because my melanocytes are a bit more dormant. They're not super active. So I'm going to burn from the sun before the melanocytes really activate and protect me. Now, on the other end, a skin type 4, 5, or 6, they're constantly active. You can see it. You can visually see it. You can see that they have darker skin because their melanocytes are active. Now, this is also a negative in a way. It's a positive to the sun and how they have that natural protection, but it's a negative in a way because their melanocytes are so active. If there's a hormonal change, there's pregnancy, and those hormones start to activate the enzyme that produces pigment, and the melanocytes go woo, and they speed up and they start producing too much pigment, then they end up with melasma. Or if they do a really aggressive chemical peel, or if they're just spending too much time in the sun, especially if they have family history of melasma. This is where we typically see melasma sufferers being darker skin types, 4 through 6. Primarily skin type 4 though, primarily, and skin type 5. So Indian skin, Asian skin, Hispanic skin, and I actually have a map of the world that I'm going to show you next just to get a better idea of that. But skin type 6 can also suffer, and it's just that we don't see it as much on a skin type 6, like a true, dark skin type 6. They may have it, you just don't see it. But your lighter skin type 6s, you'll see it, and they suffer from it as well. Okay, any questions on that? That part's very important. Okay, so skin color results from a combination of genetic, environmental, and physiological factors. Genetic differences in skin color result from different amounts of melanin and the size of melanin granules. So your darker skin types have more melanin, and also the granules are larger. So just take a look here so you can get an idea of typically the darker skin types and where they come from. And the reason being is, we'll take Africa here, and right smack dab in the center of Africa is a very dry climate, but a very sunny climate. So this is where they need the most protection from the sun. So you're going to find your skin type 6s here. And then you can see we're smack dab in the middle of Africa, but as we start to work up here towards Egypt, now towards Spain, and then Norway and Sweden up here, it's getting to colder and colder and colder, and also wetter climates. And those climates, they don't need as much protection from the sun, so they're naturally going to be more fair. So this is good to know, because when you're sitting down in a consultation with the patient and you're going through their intake form, and you really want to find out more about, where are their parents from, so you can get a really good understanding of their skin type, especially when they do the Fitzpatrick skin type quiz and they don't answer quite right. A lot of people don't go out and bake in the sun anymore because we know how bad the sun is for us. But they remember when they were a child and how easily it was for them to tan. But they haven't really gone out in the sun and have done that for years and years and years. And even if they did go on vacation, they're wearing tons of sunscreen and hats and things like that. So when they fill out the Fitzpatrick quiz, they say, no, I never burn. Well, they're never burning because they're protecting themselves. And they're also remembering, well, when I was a child, I tanned really well. Well, a lot of us when we were a child tan really well, much better than when we're adults, because we start to lose a lot of our melanin. So our skin is very, very different at age 60 than it is at age 10. Just like our hair starts to gray, we're losing melanin. Our skin does the same thing. So if they're scoring that Fitzpatrick quiz and they're turning out to be in the range of a skin type 6 and they look like me, no, then you're going to need to sit down with them and talk to them more. You know, I always ask this question: if you went to Cancun for the weekend and you wore no sunscreen at all, what do you think would typically happen? And then you'll get a more honest answer. And then also checking in with, you know, where their parents were from and things like that, you know, their background. All right, so that's the skin types. Now, diagnosing melasma. So there's a few things that really make melasma stand out. One of them being that it's symmetrical. So if they have a dark patch above their lip here, they're going to have a dark patch on the other side as well. Same thing with the forehead, dark patch here, it's going to be on the opposite side. Cheeks, anywhere that you find, it's not always on the face. Typically it is, because this is where we get the most sun, but it will be symmetrical. So that's the first thing to look for. It's also denser, you know, than like typical solar lentigo, just sunspots. They're not super dense. They can be if it's years of built up sun damage, but it's not typically as dense as melasma. So there's density to it, and then dark patches of pigmentation. Typically found in women. Only 10% of males suffer from melasma. You may not have even known that males suffer from melasma, but some of them do. And the reason why women suffer from melasma more so is because we have just natural estrogen in our body that's, you know, moving around, and estrogen is a big hormonal factor for melasma, where men, there's not as much. Found on sun-exposed areas such as the face, neck, and forearms. So it can be on the neck, sure. It can be on the forearm, sure. But it's just not typical. Typically found on the face. And then where? So forehead, upper lip, bridge of nose, cheeks, and chin. There's some unfortunate patients that have it almost everywhere, and that is common, unfortunately, where they will have it on their forehead, on the bridge of their nose, their cheeks, their chin. And then sometimes with that combination, it can be above the lip too. Or I have a couple girlfriends that just suffer from melasma right above their lip, which, I mean, it's not the best area because people think that they have a mustache, and it's such a hard thing to treat, and you have to take so much time with treating melasma. You have to be so patient and careful that, you know, people are like, oh, get rid of this. I don't want a mustache. All right, so determining, there's actually 3 types of melasma. There is epidermal melasma, there's dermal melasma, but there's also mixed epidermal and dermal. So it's best when it's just epidermal, and we'll go through that in a bit more detail as we go through the PowerPoint. When it becomes dermal, it gets a bit more complicated. I say a bit, but usually a lot more complicated. But here's the photo of kind of showing, here's the basal layer, here's where all of our melanocytes are, and producing the pigment, and then here's the keratinocytes and the melanosomes. And then sometimes, because you would really think like melasma and all pigment should just be epidermal, because the melanocytes are at the bottom of the epidermis. So if they're producing pigment upwards, because those little tentacles on the melanocytes are moving up, and then they're transferring pigment, and then our skin cells are shedding and constantly renewing and moving upwards, you would think that all this pigment would be in the epidermis. But unfortunately, there can be cases where it starts to push down and going actually in the opposite direction, and that's when it becomes very tricky. Okay, so there is a very, 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 very important factor of determining if it's epidermal, dermal, or both. And It can be slightly costly to do this, but it's so important if you really feel like you're the office in the clinic that is going to be treating melasma, to invest in a couple things to be able to treat your patients optimally, but also making sure that the melasma doesn't backfire on you and it ends up becoming worse instead of better. And one of the things to invest in is an imaging system or a Woods lamp that uses wavelengths between 360 nanometers and 415 nanometers. Some imaging systems use many different wavelengths because they're able to show porphyrin in the skin, and they can show, so acne. They can show the amount of pigment that you have. They can show the amount of vascular you have. They can show how big your pores are and how oily you are and how many wrinkles you have. There's some out there that are just phenomenal. But, you know, or a Woods lamp. But this is very important because when you put your patient under a Woods lamp, if it's epidermal melasma, the pigmentation will show as dark brown and well-defined under the lamp. So here you can see that photo of, okay, she came in with this type of melasma here. All right, let's see what it was, or what it is, I should say. And you can clearly see this is epidermal melasma. Awesome. It's going to be much easier to treat. Now on the opposite end, if it's dermal melasma, the pigmentation will appear as a blue or bluish gray color and much harder to see. It doesn't go from this to, wow, that's well defined under the Woods lamp or under the imaging system. It's very hard to see. It's almost seems like there's no change, and it's going to look like a different color. So you're going to have to approach these type of melasma, different types of melasma, very differently. So it's good to invest in something like that if you're going to be treating melasma. Any questions so far? We'll stop just for a couple seconds here to see. Okay. Now, so we spoke about there's different types of melasma, epidermal, dermal, mixed. There's also two different types of melasma in terms of the stability. So now we'll talk about stable melasma versus unstable melasma because they're very different and you'll have a very different approach. Stable melasma. When they have stable melasma, the melanocyte cells can be reset. I think I have a bit more detail of what that means in just a bit. So I'll save that, but it's so important. Not only are we going in and just breaking up the pigment and getting rid of the pigment that's there, but we need to reset the melanocyte cells so they function properly. Because remember, if we just go in and break the pigment up, all those layers of the epidermis, we're not actually then in turn focusing on the actual problem. And the problem is the melanocyte and the way it's producing pigment. We only break up the pigment that's here and we stop and we don't get to the actual melanocyte, it's just going to keep doing its thing and producing too much pigment. So we need to reset those cells, and we'll talk about that in more detail. Once reset, the treatment of melasma can be easier and results can last longer. So there's many cases where somebody will come in and, you know, pay for a package of, I don't know, 10 treatments, let's say, because they have a lot of melasma and they do all 10 treatments, you know, it's a lot. And okay, you got rid of the pigment. It doesn't always have to be 10 treatments. I'm just giving an example. And then 3 to 4 months later, it's back. So now they're unhappy. And this is primarily unstable melasma, where you have physiological factors that can cause the melanocytes to not reset after treatment, therefore making it much harder to treat and possibly needing more treatments because it's just constantly coming back. And unstable melasma is typically the factors are hormonal. So it can be overall hormones, it can be they are going through menopause or just hormone fluctuations in general in the body. an increase, an uptake of, an uptick of estrogen. Pregnancy is a huge one. If they have the mask of pregnancy where they get it while they're pregnant, they don't necessarily have to get a treatment after pregnancy, because a lot of times once the hormones balance in the body, it's gone within a year. So some women just don't want to wait that long, wait a year to have all this melasma on their face, but it will typically clear on its own. Now, very different with birth control pills. If they're, taking a certain contraceptive, oral contraceptive, and it's, let's just say, higher in estrogen, and they start getting melasma, this can be years and years and years of a problem, because the medication is not like pregnancy. Pregnancy, you are pregnant, your hormones go crazy, you have the baby, your hormones go crazy, and then after labor, everything, your body knows what to do, and everything kind of settles and comes back to normal, and that's when the melasma can fade. With birth control pills and the medication, and those hormones are just constantly in fluctuation or too high, too much estrogen in the body, then they can have it for years to come. So you can always recommend to your patients that if their OBGYN prescribed them a birth control pill. And by the way, you guys are going to know this, because in your consultation process with melasma, it's so important to have a health questionnaire. So I always preach about that, having a lifestyle intake form. How much water do you drink? Do you use sunscreen? Do you drink alcohol? Do you smoke? All these different things are going to factor in, and knowing how they're typically going to respond to treatments that you're doing, even not melasma, just everything. So patient intake forms are so important. But with melasma patients, you should have a separate one, or just include it in your overall. And it should ask things like, their genetic, their family history. And does anybody have melasma in their family? The onset of melasma, when did it happen? Was there any type of circumstance that was going on when the melasma, the melasma appeared? So you're going to know when you sit down in a consultation and you're really questioning them and finding out the details of, is this stable or unstable? Did their melasma come because they were diagnosed with a thyroid condition, and they're still working with an endocrinologist, and that their hormones are not quite balanced yet? Or they think they may have a hormonal condition because they were gaining a lot of weight, and then all of a sudden melasma came, and then all of a sudden they started getting hair on their body that was never there before. It could be around the areolas, it could be on the chin, is a huge one. Those are signs that, yeah, something might not be quite right within the body. So this is going to give you an idea of, do you want to go down the road of selling them a package of 8 when they haven't even seen an endocrinologist yet? They haven't even, checked their hormones. They're not on any type of medication to stabilize anything that's going on within the body. And that's why I put the photo of this house here. It's really a representation of the melanocytes and how they are active, and then when we have something that's unstable and a physiological factor within the body, that, let's pretend like all of these are your melanocytes within your skin. And our melanocytes are supposed to be nice and cool and controlled. And let's just say that these rooms are nice and cool and controlled and comfortable. But these rooms, or these melanocytes, are hyperactive. They're hot. They're running on hot, and they're producing too much pigment. So here's the problem: is we can try to go in and reset these melanocytes so they're no longer producing as much pigment. We can try to cool them down so everything is in line. But the problem is, because of something that's going on within their body, a physiological factor within their body, there's nothing you can do. You're just, you know, chasing something that you can never capture. So really they need to focus within the body first. Like I said, see an endocrinologist, find out what's going on with the hormones. Once that's sorted, then sure, now we're more so looking at stable melasma, and we are able to reset those melanocytes, making this house perfectly, what's perfect temperature, 76 degrees, not, you know, running on hot. So very important. Your lifestyle intake forms, very important. Have a different one for melasma. Ask a ton of questions and find out what was the trigger. Sometimes it can be heat and it wasn't hormones at all. They have a family history of it, and let's say that they're a chef and they're always over a flame. And, you know, they're never out in the sun, but you're asking them questions of when did you first see the onset and what's your lifestyle like? Like, are you ever outside? No. Or if you are you always wearing sunscreen? They say, no, I'm never outside. What's your occupation? And they say, I'm a chef. Oh, okay. Are you over a flame all day? Yes. The heat can bring it out as well. So those patient intake forms and just taking the time in the consultation to really find out what's going on with them is so important. Any questions so far? Okay, mask of pregnancy. So lots and lots of women suffer from this. An estimated 10 to 15% of women are affected by this condition. But in some geographical areas, this percentage can be as high as 50 to 70%. So again, I want you to think of countries like India and Asian countries, even South America. The percentage is going to be much, much higher in these regions. Now, if you're a clinic, an office that has a lot of darker skin types, you have a lot of Iranian women and Indian women and Asian women, then you're going to see it a lot more as well. Your darker skin types, again, suffer from it more. Estrogen and progesterone levels rise and stimulates excess melanin production. So that's when it's very hormonal, that's stimulating that pigment production. It may resolve on its own after birth. Typically, it will resolve within about a year. And then 10 to 25% of women develop melasma while taking oral contraceptives. And then I spoke about this already, but a low-dose estrogen birth control pill may help resolve the condition. So, you know, you can always talk to them like you found out that they just started taking birth control pills. And you can tell them, instead of selling them a big package of treatments, instead it might be a quick fix. It may be, have you had your doctor put you on any different birth control pills? And, you know, that's all it may be, that they switch over to a different birth control pill, possibly low estrogen, and now it's cleared. So definitely try to follow those steps first of, is it a quick fix? And help your patient that way. They'll appreciate you for it. Okay, so now we'll get into treating melasma. So 3 steps in controlling melasma. You guys have probably already heard me talk about this a lot on reduction of production. And what I mean by that is I'm constantly talking about melanin inhibitors. So the next slide is going to fully go through that. So 3 steps: reduction of production, control of hypervascularity, and speed up pigment removal. A lot of people don't realize that melasma is highly vascular. So we'll go through that as well. Okay, so treatment modalities that can be used for melasma. Exfoliation, such as microdermabrasion or retinols, vitamin A, chemical peels. Lasers can be used, IPL can be used, ablative RF, also non-ablative, certain non-ablative lasers like a Q-switch laser. Oral medications, oh, I wrote down the name of the really popular oral medication and I just saw that I messed it up in the PowerPoint. I put this photo there and it blocked it. And I can't remember the name of it, but when we're done with the PowerPoint, somebody remind me if I forget. I'll come back and I'll just move that so I can read the name for you, unless somebody knows and you can write it in. But there's a very popular oral medication that doctors will prescribe. It's not as big in the US as it is around the world, but I think it's getting more popular here too. And then microneedling with either PRP or PRF can help. So here we have with Viora, because you may have, you know, chemical peels that you offer, you may have a Q-switch laser that you offer. But if you're primarily a Viora clinic, then you have the pristine microdermabrasion. If you don't, you should, because it is the ultimate for prepping the skin and just so great for overall exfoliation. And then the VFR, this is our brand new FDA cleared handpiece. We just got FDA clearance on it about 2 to 3 months ago, and we're ecstatic because of how beautifully it works and how amazing it is and how well it can treat melasma. And then, of course, the IPL, and we have a couple different filters with the IPL that can target melasma too. Okay, so we'll go into reduction of production. So melasma is due to the overproduction of pigment and stimulation of I was going to say it really slowly, but I really messed up. Tyrosinase. Sorry, I said it wrong. Second time. Tyrosinase. It's an enzyme. I never use tyrosinase. I always just say melanin inhibitor. But it's important to know because you'll hear tyrosinase so much when you're looking into different inhibitor products and ingredients. And what is it? So it's an enzyme involved in the production of melanin. So tyrosinase inhibitors include, or melanin inhibitors include, arbutin. And I always list all of these on webinars, and I'm like, now I can finally write them all out. So arbutin, licorice root or mulberry, kojic acid is a very popular one, B3, vitamin C, willow bark, lactic acid, green tea, and hydroquinone. So these are just a few and really the most popular ones that you'll typically see in different skincare lines. You just have to be very careful when they are choosing or you're choosing a line to carry within your office. You have to be careful of knowing the percentage of these different botanicals and drugs within the serums or creams. Also, how were they extracted? You know, how was the licorice root extracted? So I would definitely do your research because there's going to be a lot of like brightening, lightening lines out there and products out there. So just really do your studying and choose one that really does have a good percentage and the right extraction method, so on and so forth. Okay. So the most important thing is that when someone comes in with melasma, that you're not going to sell them, you know, you figured out that, okay, they have epidermal melasma, it's stable, so this is going to be the easiest type of melasma to treat, so I'm going to sell them a package of 6, and you book them the following week or the following day, and let's get going. No, this is when melasma can then backfire on you. When you go in before the skin is prepped, I always say prep the skin before melasma, but you have to reduce the amount of enzyme that is being produced down in the basal layer, those melanocytes, and really calm them down and slow that production so they're not overproducing. If you do not, and you go in with laser, the overall heat and inflammation can backfire, and it will turn from light brown to dark brown to black, this small to this large. So you have to be very careful with that. And really the guideline is going to be wearing their topical for morning and night for 2 to 4 weeks. But I always say I would just be extra, extra, extra cautious and do 4 weeks. It doesn't mean that you have to say, okay, bye, we'll see you in 4 weeks, and you're worried like, oh gosh, are they ever going to come back? That's a month. You know, you can have them back in for other things, and, you know, come back in 2 weeks so we can assess your skin, and we can do like a light facial on you, you know, something to where they're seeing you in between. But just being very, very safe and wearing it morning and night for 4 weeks is going to be the best. Some different products that I know are good, but again, I would just do your research as well, because there's so many skincare lines out there. But Skin Medica has a couple great products that have these ingredients, some of these ingredients. Typically kojic acid is a big one. Also, if you're a physician, you can prescribe hydroquinone, so it can just be a prescription. But Skin Medica, SkinCeuticals has a couple good ones. Skin Medica has a great one called Lytera 2.0. SkinCeuticals has Advanced Pigment Corrector, and I always forget the name. Color Defense, something Defense. Anyways, I think it's the only product with the word defense in it by SkinCeuticals. So they have a couple great ones, but you can even just look up SkinCeuticals brighteners, skin brighteners, and you'll see the ones that pop up. And then look at the ingredients. They always have the ingredients on there. Do they have kojic acid? Is it a good percent of kojic acid? Or vitamin C. Obagi has, you know, Obagi was known for such a long time for the doctor for melasma, where he would have a ton of patients flying over from Asia to come see him. So he definitely has a lot of products in his line for melasma as well. And a lot of times, if their melasma isn't very bad, you can just start them on a topical. You don't have to go in with the viewer treatments. Typically you do, just to break up the pigment, but sometimes it can be a quick fix of a retinol and a melanin inhibitor, tyrosinase. Okay, so next, control of, do you guys have any questions on that last slide? I'll go back. I wonder if you guys can unmute yourselves. You can write in the chat though. Okay, no questions. All right, so control of hypervascularity. So I put this photo here so you could see that, yeah, she has melasma. You can see the dark patch of pigment, but also if you look closely, you can see the underlying redness and erythema in the area. And typically, all melasma will have that. Sometimes it's harder to see the vascular component because the pigment component is so so in your face, right? You can see it so strongly, and it's predominant, and it's hard to see the vascular component. But if you just push with, you know, 1 or 2 fingers on their skin and let go, you can actually see it blanch, because most do have that vascular component. So melasma is not just a pigment issue. This condition is also highly vascular in nature. Melasma skin has more numerous and larger blood vessels than non-melasma skin in both men and women, because men suffer from it as well. An increase of blood vessels plays a role in stimulation of pigment from the melanocytes to the neighboring keratinocytes. So that increased blood circulation, I actually spoke a lot about that on the last webinar, the last Skin 102 webinar, and how our vascular and circulatory system stimulates so much within our skin, within our body, but also within our skin. So it does play a role in the production of pigment from the melanocytes as well. So you have to look at this as a double approach, and that it is vascular and it is pigment. So we have both, but we're also lucky because here's the chromophore absorption chart. And if you are going to be using the IPL, the intense pulse light, I'm going to take our two primary filters for pigmentation. We have the 530 nanometer filter, and then we have the 580 nanometer filter. So chromophores are here in the center, and then down here at the bottom, this is where our wavelengths are. So if we go to 530, which is right about here, and we go all the way up, it is going to be a very high absorption of melanin, but it's also a very high absorption of hemoglobin and oxyhemoglobin too. And then the same thing with 580, it's right about here. Really high absorption of hemoglobin and oxyhemoglobin, also really high absorption of melanin. So if you're going to use the intense pulse light, you are targeting both at the same time. You're able to, it's really finding the browns and the reds, right? And I spoke a lot about this with overall sun damage. When a lady or male comes in with just a lot of sun damage on their face because they've never had treatments done and they baked all through the 80s with their baby oil, and they come in, it's not just pigment that you're going to see. There's going to be a lot of broken capillaries in the area as well. So browns usually come with reds. Reds and browns, they come together. So it's great because we're able to target both at the same time. Okay, so with the treatment, we're going to make sure that we're prepping the skin 2 to 4 weeks beforehand with the melanin inhibitor topicals, and then we're going to go into treatment. And the treatment is going to help speed up the pigmentation removal, because if we are just slowing down the melanocytes with the topical, it doesn't mean that the melasma is going to completely fade away. It typically doesn't. It may lighten just a bit, so they get excited. Great, this topical is working. A lot of times they can visually see that, but it will then kind of stop and they're like, oh, it's not getting any better now. This is where your treatments come in hand, being able to remove all of that residual pigment that is left behind. So you have to be very, very, very careful with this though. Okay, energy-based treatments can be very effective by using, and if you guys are taking notes, make sure to take notes on this, by using low power with a high affinity to melanin. So the high affinity to melanin is that absorption chart that I just showed, the right wavelengths. We need the proper wavelengths to want to target the pigment, but we also don't want really, really deep wavelengths because we need to be very, very careful with stimulating the melanocyte. We don't want to stimulate it. It's already overstimulated. So if we go in with really high-powered lasers, with really aggressive jewel settings with our IPL, with really deep penetration, we're going to stimulate those melanocytes. And even if their skin is prepped, it can backfire. Just like if you prep their skin for 4 weeks and then you do a really aggressive deep chemical peel, we're stimulating the melanocytes. So we want to avoid that. And that's where melasma can be a much longer process because you have to be very gentle and really take your time with it. So you treat it properly without it backfiring and turning darker. So I want you to just think and remember this: lower jewels. Be extra, extra cautious for 2 reasons. Lower jewels because we don't want to stimulate the melanocytes. Additionally, what skin type typically suffers from melasma? Are darker skin types. Who is more susceptible to burns with an IPL or laser? Darker skin types. So it goes with both, that why we need to use lower jewels. A longer pulse duration. So remember with that, if you're using the IPL, the shorter the pulse duration and the quicker you're putting it into the tissue, the more aggressive it becomes. So remember I give that analogy of Mike Tyson. Mike Tyson with a really strong punch, or Mike Tyson really tired and slow and he's just kind of tapping his opponent. There's a big difference. So I want you to remember that analogy from the IPL didactic webinar in again, not overstimulating those melanocytes. And you can do so if you're getting aggressive at all. So it can be aggressive with your energy, and it can be aggressive with your pulse duration. So go a bit slower with your pulse duration when you first start. Also safer pulse configurations. So remember, we have the single, multiple, and rapid. Even if it's a skin type 2 that comes in that suffers from melasma, try to treat them with the multiple pulse structure in the beginning, especially. And it's not going to be as strong, right? The single pulse single pulse configuration is such a, aggressive. There's the light's not broken up at all. It's just taking, all the energy and just kind of slamming into the skin, which is great for solar lentigo, because a lot of times they need that big punch for them to go away. But with melasma, it's going to be very different. So even if they're a lighter skin type, you're going to be safer with the multiple pulse structure because the light is broken up. So if you're using 10 joules of energy, it's just going to deliver it and then let the skin cool, deliver it, let the skin cool, deliver it. So just remember, how can I be very cautious and careful with treating melasma? Don't go as high in your energy. Don't shorten the pulse duration so much. Don't use a single pulse structure in the very beginning. Test with a multiple, or test with the rapid if they're a skin type 5 or 6. Okay, and that's when you're going to allow the immune system to reset the skin cells. So I'll talk about this. Phagocytosis. So as a reminder, phagocytosis. So with IPL, if you're treating vascular lesions, if you're treating hyperpigmentation on the skin, how does all of that hyperpigmentation magically go away? Because it seems like magic. And it's due to the process of phagocytosis, where we go in and with light, we shatter the pigment into teeny tiny particles, and then the immune system response sends our white blood cells, or a nickname for them are Pac-Man cells, and the Pac-Man cells come and engulf the debris because they realize the molecular structure of that pigment has changed, and now it's a foreign object to the body. So it naturally will get rid of any type of foreign body. Hopefully, that's what our immune system is for. But for some reason, the immune system also plays a role in helping to reset those melanocytes, to reset them. Think of that house photo I had. Reset those thermostats back to, a nice, comfortable 76 degrees, 74 degrees. So that's so important. We don't want to overstimulate the melanocytes and produce more. We don't want to inflame them. We want to slowly just reset them, so the results last forever or for a long time. All right, so the big thing is, a lot of times that's what's great about Viora, is that it's a platform system. So you have the IPL right there to use. You have the VFR right there to use. You have the Indiag laser if you have the V30, and we'll talk about that when we get into PIH. But you have all of these, or the Pristine, the Microdermabrasion. So you have all these things to try. And the reason why is not everybody responds to the exact same treatment. And remember, it could be epidermal, it could be dermal, it could be mixed. So sometimes it takes a combination approach to properly treat melasma. So it's not going to always be the same protocol. That, okay, everybody with melasma comes in, we just do 530 filter over and over and over again, and they're done. No, it doesn't always work that way. Some people may respond better with the VFR because the VFR is radio frequency and it's not a light-based treatment. And the reason why I say that is, remember, one of the big factors of stimulating melasma is sun. And it's the sun exposure that darkens it and even brings it out. But laser in IPL are light-based technologies. So it's the same thing. It can bring it out even more. So with VFR, it's RF, not light-based. So sometimes they can respond better to that. So you have different, hand pieces to grab for. And then also your microdermabrasion, because exfoliation can be really good for melasma too. Now, if you do, I didn't add this, but if you do chemical peels, you know, that can be in the mix. It could be, you know, a combination approach where they're doing a very light chemical peel, because you don't want to do anything aggressive, very light chemical peel. A month later, the VFR, a month later, a light chemical peel. So, you know, it can be a combination with different exfoliating factors. All right, so what I recommend is doing test spots with different frequencies and modalities. So somebody comes in with melasma, choose the side. So if they have it on their forehead, don't choose here to test, choose here to test. If it's the bridge of their nose and that's all is, that's the only area that is affecting their face, then you're just kind of like, oh, okay, you just have to test there. But if it's on the cheeks or the forehead, try to pick areas on the side. And test with different jewels, not too high though. Test with different pulse configurations and pulse durations. Test with 2 different filters, the 530 nanometer or the 580 nanometer. Test with the VFR and do just very slight ablation. So you can see when they come back a week later, which one responded really well. Did one of the areas darken? Okay, you don't want to go with that. So the consultation process with melasma is going to take a lot longer, but so is the initial testing, longer than most things that you're going to be treating. So make sure to really carve out the time when they come in to properly assess. And also, if you have the imaging system or the Woods lamp, you're going to need to put them under that to see if it's, you know, how deep it is. Because we know we can target different depths. We can target with the 530 more superficial. We can go a bit deeper with the 580 if it's dermal. With the VFR, we can stay superficial, shallow in the epidermis, or we can choose deep and medium into the deeper dermal layers. So you'll know when you see it under a Woods lamp or an imaging system, the route that you're going to need to take with that patient. Okay, let me see a question here. Okay, hold on one second. I'm just going to take a sip. For some reason, I thought this might be an hour, but I think looking at more like 2. Okay, so before you treat with Biora, client should use a topical. Yes. So I'll just go back really quick so you can see that. Here. The reduction of production. You need to make sure that those melanocytes are a bit more controlled, a bit more stable before you go in with any treatments. Okay, the next thing we're going to go through is PIH. So I'm just going to stop just for a minute and see if you guys have any questions on melasma. This is a perfect time to ask. I thought I would have so many. Okay. All right, so now we'll go into just reading themselves. No. Okay, so now we will go into PIH and PIE. So I'll explain what those are. This isn't going to be as long as melasma. It's not as complex. It is still much harder to treat, but not as complex. Okay, so PIE and PIH. PIE, post-inflammatory erythema. So this is the photo here to the right, is more of the redness after acne breakouts. Well, typically, I was going to say like if you have a burn, something like that. But it's typically when somebody suffers from acne breakouts that they end up with PIE. And this is areas of superficial blood vessels, so the redness, remaining from the wound healing process, common after inflammatory acne, more visible in lighter skinned individuals. So it doesn't mean that darker skinned individuals do not have or get this. It's just more of a cosmetic concern for lighter skinned individuals, where it's a bigger cosmetic concern for darker skin with PIH. Now, this a lot of times can resolve on its own, but there's some circumstances where this can last a very long time, and it can be, of course, a concern to the client. So there are methods of treating it, and that's what we'll go through in the next slide. I just saw that I have a question. Okay, with pigment suppression modulation, generally, how many treatments are needed for melasma? IPL, usually 1 month apart. It so varies. So her question was, you're using the topicals, and by the way, it's best for them to stay on those topicals throughout their whole course of treatment. So it's not just the 4 weeks and they stop. They're going to stay on it. So it's also very important for them not to get on a topical that will make the skin really sensitive to light-based treatments. Otherwise, you're kind of stuck. You can't do the treatment. But okay, so they're prepping their skin for 4 weeks, and now how many times are they coming in? And you're correct, we're spacing it 1 month apart because we don't want to aggravate and inflame the area any more than it already is. So we're not treating too soon. It's so hard to say how many treatments, because it's, how cautious are you being? Which is a good thing. Oh, I forgot to mention something. Let me go back really quick. I put these 2 photos up. I forgot to mention them as an example of being cautious in your treatments. So for her, I don't necessarily want your endpoint to be like this, to be this dark. This can be a bit too aggressive, and okay, you have possibly stimulated those melanocytes, and now you're doing the opposite work of trying to make it better. So I want you to more so have this type of endpoint where you can see some darkening, just very minimally in some areas. Here you can see a bit of darkening here at the bottom. Here you can see a bit of darkening, but surrounding it, not so much, and that's okay, because melasma is a layered process, and it's also layered in the skin. So don't go in and try to break it all up in one treatment with this. You want to be gradual with it. I'm glad you asked that question, because I forgot to point that out. So yeah, okay, so going back to your question, it depends on how cautious you're being, how the patient is responding, because maybe it is, you thought it was stable melasma and it's not. So yeah, it really varies. I would say to be very safe, and I was going to say like a package of 10, and then save some for maintenance, or allow them, if you did your job in 6 treatments, allow them to maybe take additional ones and roll them over into something else, or have a monthly program for melasma clients that they pay a certain amount per month. And then it's not, they're buying a big package to start when you're not quite sure how many treatments it will be. And I think just to be safe, I would do probably 10. And if they need to add on more as you go, that's okay too. I wish I could tell you it's about 6, it's about 10, but there's so many factors. Is it dermal? Is it epidermal? Epidermal is much easier to treat than dermal. Is it mixed in both? Is it stable? Is it not stable? How cautious are you being each time you're doing your treatments? It's hard to say. That's why I love monthly memberships so much, because you're not locked into saying you can get rid of it in 10, or we can get rid of this in 6. Does that help? I hope. Okay, so so that's going to be PIE. PIH, so post-inflammatory hyperpigmentation. Woof. It's not fun for the darker skin patients, but it's dark pigment, so melanin, following an inflammation such as inflammatory acne. And it's not just inflammatory acne though, it's, you know, they burn themselves on the stove, they burn themselves with a curling iron, they cut themselves on a fence, and their body just wants to hyperpigment. And that's typically found in your skin type 4s, 5s, and 6s. That was my next bullet. More common in darker skin individuals, 80% occurs from, so if we're talking about acne, 80% of post-inflammatory acne patients occurs with mild to moderate acne, not even like cystic and nodular, which you think cystic and nodular acne, it's so aggressive, it's so deep, it's so large, there's a lot of inflammation, but actually 80% of it is caused by just mild to moderate. So it's so unfortunate that they can have just, you're looking at the photo here, she doesn't have horrible cystic and nodular acne. Hers is more moderate. It could even be mild, but it looks moderate because of all the PIH that she has in her skin. 50% of PIH lasts 1 year. So hard to get rid of and so hard for it to fade. And 25% of PIH lasts for 5 years or longer. So that's where I'm sure you have a lot of people seeking treatments for this, because it doesn't just, the PIE fades fairly quickly. PIH really doesn't. So that's why you probably see quite a few patients for this. Okay, so treatment of PIE, we'll talk about that first. And they're very similar though. Step 1 is going to be prevention. So why, if they have acne, if they burn themselves with a curling iron or they had surgery and they're hyperpigmented from that, that's going to be different. You can't prevent that. But if they are suffering from acne and that's why they have PIH, your first step is going to be prevention of the acne. Because if you can get the acne under control, you're not going to have issues with PIE or PIH. So the biggest thing, and I'm sure you guys already do this in your consultations, if you don't, you must, is talking to them about sunscreen and the importance of that. And if they have acne breakouts, the sun is going to be a big contributing factor in inflammation in the skin and making that PIH or PIE worse. So making sure that they wear sunscreen, but also choosing the sunscreen wisely. They shouldn't be choosing something that's comedogenic that can actually cause more breakouts. So you need to find something, and they need to find something that is a high factor SPF. Zinc oxide is going to be a great one that's not going to also create breakouts, because that's going to go against what you're trying to do. Avoid picking. That is a huge one. If we're picking at a scab or a scab on our skin, we can very easily scar from that. So same thing, if they're picking at their face, then that inflammation can create that PIE or PIH. You can use the melanin inhibitor. You can use those products that we were talking about to tell those melanocytes to calm down, because well, I shouldn't have put that for PIE. I didn't mean to put that for PIE, but let's pretend like we're talking about PIH. That's going to calm down those melanocytes to not, produce as much pigment. So they can be using this as well as a sunscreen every day. And then microdermabrasion. So prevention. This is if they have acne. Prevention is going to be microdermabrasion for the acne skin. Why? Because we have all of those dead skin cells that are really creating the problem in the first place. It could be things other than dead skin cells. It could be dirt, makeup, debris, but usually it's dead skin cells that are creating a barrier in the skin, and it's a breeding ground then for acne bacteria because there's a plug over the pores, so there's no oxygen in the area. So it's a breeding ground for bacteria. So if you're doing microdermabrasion, really removing those dead skin cells, nothing aggressive though. If somebody really suffers from these conditions, you have to be very, very gentle because it's just like melasma. You don't want to aggravate it even more. So be very cautious with the microdermabrasion. The tip that if you have the pristine microdermabrasion from Viora, the tip that you're using is going to be more of the fine tip, not so coarse, and also your vacuum level very low. And then you'll follow it up with the IPL acne filter, the 415 nanometer. Remember that uses blue light. So it's going to go in and kill the acne bacteria by targeting the porphyrin within the bacteria. And then I always recommend to follow it up with a skin rejuvenation treatment. You can be a little bit more cautious though with patients that suffer from these conditions, different than if it's just a person that suffers from acne and they don't end up with PIH or PIE. You can be a bit more aggressive and do microdermabrasion 415 filter than the 580 all in the same day. But if they do suffer from that, then just a very mild microdermabrasion, a mild acne treatment with the 415, still getting to your endpoint, but not pushing the limits. And then the following week, they can come back for a very mild skin rejuvenation treatment. And why that works so well is because it helps shrink the sebaceous glands and it regulates the sebum. And it regulates the sebaceous glands, I should say, and to not overproduce too much sebum. So that really is helpful, but you just have to be careful on how much you're doing to their skin that same day if they do suffer from things that the inflammatory response in the skin wants to flare up and create complications for you. I'm sure you've seen people that have had really deep chemical peels and they're skin type 5, let's say, and you can see the marks of where the chemical peel was placed on their skin because they have such bad PIH. So remember that chemical peels or even really aggressive laser treatments can create PIH. If you accidentally burn somebody with an IPL that has dark skin, then that's where you're like, oh, you're worried because they may PIH after. If you have the Nd:YAG laser, you have the V30 by Viora. We also have the ability to do skin rejuvenation, which is much safer on darker skin types by using the 9.5 spot size. It's a longer wavelength, but it's safer for dark skin. So you can do very, very mild, and that can help regulate the sebaceous glands as well. Okay, so step 2, so that's all prevention. So, if they suffer from acne and this is why they have it. Step 2, the actual treatment. So you got the acne under control, or they came into your clinic, they no longer have active acne. They're just left with the PIE, all the little red spots. So now you're going to come to step 2 in the actual treatment of those. And because they're so highly vascular, they're just collections of tiny little blood vessels. You have the VIPL, which is really, really high hemoglobin absorption. And you have the 530 nanometer filter, and you also have the 580 nanometer filter that's targeted to the vascular component. Lighter skin types typically respond better to the 530 nanometer filter. The reason why I put that bullet point in is because remember that that PIE is much more visible in lighter skin individuals. So your darker skin clients are typically not coming in for PIE, where it is your lighter skin clients. So with that being said, their response to treatment, the 530 nanometer, is such a perfect wavelength for teeny tiny little capillaries in the skin of the face. So that's going to be best to use. Okay, any questions on PIE before we move to PIH? Maybe number of treatments. That's hard to say too, because you're not being so cautious with PIE PIE really won't take too many treatments. I would say 3 to 4. Definitely not as complex as melasma or even PIH. PIH is going to need more treatments, but you can typically really help those areas in 3 to 4 treatments. What was I going to say? If they come in with those red spots, or they come in with the PIH, the post-inflammatory hyperpigmentation, and that's all that's bothering them at the moment, I would also double check that they don't have actual scarring, because PIE and PIH, it's not a scar. But if they had a lot of acne breakouts and they have these discoloration on their face, I would also make sure that they don't have actual scarring, because you could possibly really get rid of the red spots, you can get rid of the dark brown spots, and then after they can look at their skin and go, oh, I didn't realize I have all the scarring on my skin as well. So I think it's best to know that before you're going in for treatment, so you can talk to them about that and figure out a treatment plan in total. You know, they're probably not going to be happy just with the dark pigment now gone, because now their focus is on the actual divots in their skin. So I would find that out and have a treatment plan before you start. A good way of really knowing do they have actual scarring is when you lay them down, take a light to the side of their face. It can even be like your cell phone. Here, I'm going to turn mine on. So your light like this, and as they're laying down, you can shine the light and look at it from a side angle, a side view. And then usually that's when you can see if there's any type of divots in the skin, and then to help with your overall treatment plan. That's a cheap way of doing it, your cell phone light. Okay, so no questions on that. We'll move on to PIH. Okay, treatment of PIH. So exact same prevention. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. We want to prevent the problem if we can. Again, if it's a curling iron burn, well, you can't prevent that. It already happened. But if it's acne breakouts, which causes a lot of PIH, then prevent it from ever happening. Stop it. So sunscreen, avoid picking, and this is correct, using the melanin inhibitor, microdermabrasion, using the acne filter, doing some skin rejuvenation, but again, on a very, very mild energy setting, very mild vacuum, and the tip that you're using for microdermabrasion being very fine, just being very gentle to not aggravate the skin further. And then step 2, the actual treatment of PIH. So lots of things can be done here. We can do microdermabrasion for exfoliation, because the pigment is also, we can visually see it. So a lot of it's going to be in the stratum corneum, in the epidermal layers. So microdermabrasion helps skin cell turnover. Additionally, peels do as well. So if you do peels in your office, do something very mild. You don't want a lot of peeling on the face, just very light exfoliation to the skin. And then the IPL, the 530 and 580, both can work with PIH. So just think of it like melasma too. It's not as complex as melasma, but it can be aggravated by doing certain treatments. So just be gentle, be careful with it. Do test spots in the consultation. Use the 530 at a mild energy and use the 580 at a mild energy, and do tests and bring them back a week later and see which one is responding well. If you have the VFR, absolutely do a test spot with the VFR as well, because we have an ablative mode with the VFR, which is ablating the surface layers, and you can even go deeper with the VFR. You don't want to go so deep, again, that we're stimulating the melanocytes, but we have options there. So do a test spot with the VFR as well if you have that. And then just as a reminder, lower joules, longer pulse durations, and safer pulse configurations when you're doing these. Patience is a virtue, and you have to have that with melasma and PIH. Your patience also need to know that patience is a virtue. And they'll know that when you do your consultation with them. They'll know that when they see that you care and that you want to properly treat them and that you don't want anything to go wrong and it backfire. They may have already tried a million things before they came to you and they say it made it worse or it's not going away and they're frustrated with everything else they've tried. So they're going to appreciate that you're sitting down with them, going through these steps, them knowing how complex it can be because they're figuring out, is it stable, is it unstable? They're figuring it out, is it deep or superficial, because you're looking and then letting them know this is our treatment program. So they'll understand the complexity of it if you really take the time with them. And PIH as well. So respect the physiology of the body and that we can't just speed it up. We can't just crank up the energy and just get rid of that pigment, because that will actually be a problem. So respect that and respect time, because you're gonna have to. There's a lot of time with these conditions. All right. Any questions, you guys? If you guys know of any other products that are the tyrosinase inhibitors and you want to share, you can write that in the chat as well. That's always helpful for everybody on here. No questions? Was it okay, you guys? I always get nervous when you have no questions and it's radio silent. Oh, good. I got a thumbs up. I didn't even know you could put thumbs up like that. That's really cool. All right, let me just make sure I don't have any questions in the chat that I didn't see. Oh, I do. When will this be available to view? I don't fully understand. Oh, you mean, I just want to make sure I understand your question right, Linda, I think it is. Do you mean when will it be able to be viewed again, like watching the webinar over? Oh, to watch again, yes. Pretty much right after. So as soon as I hang up with you guys, it uploads on my computer. I send it over to our marketing manager, Donna, and then she immediately uploads it to both the customer portal on myviora.com and additionally on the Viora Academy website where you guys register. I heard somebody unmute themselves. Is there a question? My makeup is melting down my face. I am one oily skin individual. Oh, thank you so much for reminding me. All right, give me 1 second. So she just asked, what was the oral medication? So let me just move that photo out of the way and get the name for you. Okay, I'm copying it. And then I'm going to write into the chat. I'm trying to remember how to pronounce it. Transimic or transimic, something like that, acid. but here I have the spelling for you. Okay, there you go. So that's the oral medication that a lot of doctors use, especially around the world, to treat melasma. And sometimes they, you know, will try that first before they move on to light-based technologies. Sometimes they prefer using the light-based or like the VFR, and not do the oral medication right away. So, but at least you have options. You know, you're not kind of stuck with, oh, I only have one thing and it's not working for the specific patient, because every patient's going to respond so differently. So you have different things that you can try for them. Thank you, very helpful. Oh, good. Thanks, I enjoyed that. Oh, yay. Okay, good. I actually love these Skin 102 webinars because I study so much before I do them, because I'm building the PowerPoint for them. And as I'm doing that, I have so many questions, and you know, I do so much research and studying and reading studies, and I'm learning with you guys, so I'm loving it too. I've learned quite a bit doing the Skin 102, and that's what I love about this industry, is that we will never know everything, which is great because we can always learn. And I think that's what keeps it so fascinating and exciting, and always learning. Okay, that was great. You were so informative, so much appreciated. Oh, good. Yeah, you're welcome. You're welcome. That makes me happy. I heard someone unmute themselves. Question. Oh, I think that's you, Linda. Oh, no, you're muted. I don't know who it is. Oh, got a question. Okay, prior to the laser treatment, do you need to stop the topicals for a certain amount of time? No, that's what's great about it. So, and that's where you have to be careful when choosing your topicals, is that they don't have things like retinol in them, vitamin A in them, because some brightening agents have the kojic acid, the vitamin C, but they'll also be mixed with exfoliating agents. And that's where, yes, they would have to stop and then do the treatment, then get back on. And that's where it can be risky. So it's best to have your peeling agents more controlled. So just have them on a topical that do not have those type of peeling agents, just things like kojic acid and vitamin C and green tea and B3, because they're not like a retinol or a vitamin A that like really exfoliates your skin and making your skin more sensitive to light-based or the VFR type treatments. So they can stay on them the entire time, and that's where it's safer. And then have your peeling agents more controlled, where if you need to add in some type of peel, like a Retin-A or a very mild chemical peel, that's in your control when the time's right, when they come into the clinic or office. If clients are treating acne and melasma, what product would be applied first? Clients are treating acne and melasma, what product would be applied first? Topical. I don't fully understand. You can, okay, if clients are treating acne and melasma, what product would be applied first? Topical or antibiotic? You just have to be careful with that too, because if they're on acne medications, you just have to make sure that, one, that they're not making their skin really really sensitive to any of the technologies, and two, what's happening within the skin, within the body with those medications as well. Because there's so many medications out there for acne, topically, orally. So you just have to be really careful with that. I would say if they're on just like a topical for their acne and it's not something that's going to really make them super sensitive to the treatment. So remember, with melasma, we have to be extra safe because they're typically darker skin. They're typically, what else was I going to say? Oh, and you also have to be really safe just because it can backfire on you, right? Because the melanocytes are so sensitive. So you just have to make sure that the topical that they're using for acne isn't going to make any type of sensitivity, because you can have even more inflammation. I hope that helps. I can answer further if I knew more details. So what I would say to do is email me with a list of the things that they're taking and or applying to their skin at the time, and then I can give you a more detailed answer and a better approach for treating their melasma and their acne. So that's clinicalusa@vioramed.com. So clinicalusa@vioramed.com. And you guys can always email with, you know, a lot of our clients do that, offices do that. They'll email what their clients are taking and on, and what kind of approach should we take to be really safe for them, but also effective. But yeah, when I know the things that they're taking and applying, then I can help you further. Any other questions? All right, you guys. Well, I'm so happy that it was helpful for you guys. I know that melasma and PIH can be very tricky and challenging, and they may walk into your office and you're like, oh, wanting to send them away. But if you have a lot of tools in your bag, you have a lot of tools in your office, then you do not necessarily have to be so scared of it. You just have to be very careful and gentle and graceful with their skin to make sure that they get the optimal results that they came in for. All right, and then just remember, your patient intake forms are so important for melasma, and sitting down with them in a consultation and really finding out their background and onset of the melasma is important as well. So make sure to do that. All right, you guys, so I will see you next week, next Thursday, collagen synthesis and scar tissue. So I'm learning a lot more about that too, so it's exciting. And I'm excited to share with you guys. All right, well, have a great weekend, and I'll see you guys soon. Bye-bye.